Hello, everyone. We call you all to order. Everybody having fun? Good. Hello, I'm Susie Aiken, class of 1984. Welcome to Writing Your Own Story. I have the honor today of introducing today's speaker, not only as someone who mostly writes for a living and really wishes I could do what she does, but as a proud member of the We Lead Advisory Board. We Lead, as you've probably heard many times today, is our women's philanthropy initiative, working closely to close an important gender gap in giving at Williams, the number of alumni fund gifts at the leadership level of $2,500 or more. As part of We Lead, I've had the good fortune to partner with amazing Williams women, drawing from every decade since the beginning of coeducation. It has taught me that our Williams world, each of ours, extends far beyond the handful of classes with whom we shared this campus at some point or other over our 4 years. This community of women is one of the greatest gifts Williams has given me, and it's inspired me to want to give back. Some point this weekend, please chat with me or one of the other advisory board members, or scan the QR code on this bookmark and learn more about it. So many women have answered the call, and yet we still need some help to really cross the finish line. Together, women can help lead women. Can I start that one over? Together, women can lead Williams into its next chapter of possibilities and impact. Each of us, since we left Williams, has been writing our own stories in one way or another, and that story is built on the foundations we built here, on the relationships, the confidence, and the curiosity our experiences nurtured. And who better to talk about the way our stories are shaped than senior lecturer in English and author Karen Shepard, class of '87. Heck, she even wrote a novel called An Empire of Women. Coincidence? Please join me in welcoming Karen Shepard.
So much, Susie. Hi. Thank you all for coming on this amazing weekend that is very cool, I think. I mean, this is going to be super interactive, so get ready. So I want to spend a little time talking just about memoir and what it means to try to sit down to craft. It's not writing it's not writing the story, it's writing stories, because I think of memoir as sort of episodic and not memoirs or autobiography or, complete, right? So I thought we'd chat for a little bit, and then I'm gonna do a little writing exercise to maybe leave you with something to think about that you might continue on your own. Not here. And I'm imagining I have people who are writers or storytellers in some way here. So I want to first talk about sort of what it is. What do you think of when you think of memoir? You can just call out or raise your hand as if you're in class. Okay, so how your childhood informed the rest of your life, the patterns that got set in childhood, and the way they play out now, right? Love it. What else do you think of?
A tell-all.
A tell-all. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, something juicy. The juicy details, right? Yeah.
Like Edith Wharton, a backward glance, just kind of looking over your shoulder.
Yes.
There, what maybe did you not notice?
Yes, and all three of these answers are touching on the notion that it's, at least some part of it is going to be a reflective self, right? So and that to me is one of the main differences between memoir and fiction, is that you have to, it seems, well, every time I say you have to do something in a writing class, and I instantly think of 85 exceptions to the rule, so take that as a caveat. But that in memoir, you have that split thing. You have the narrative self, and then you have the reflective self looking back. The way Joan Didion puts it is, it would behoove us to keep on nodding terms with our former selves. Because if you don't, they show up at 4 a.m. This sort of goes to your point, knocking on your door, wanting to be let in and bother you, right? So in other words, you go, oh yeah, I remember her, right? And the tell-all is the juicy details from the past, right? And maybe the juicy details of the narrative self are not quite the same as the juicy details for the retrospective self, but that gap is really, to me, something that memoir has to encompass, right? Okay, keep going. Why do you think it's enjoying an ongoing popularity in America? I would say since the 90s, maybe. I mean, it's always been around, obviously, but we were just, Lynn Lyons, who's speaking at 3, you should all go to her talk. She and I were just talking about the Catherine Harrison memoir, The Kiss. I don't know if anybody knows it. That came out in the mid-90s, and it kind of blew up memoir as a genre in publishing. And since then, there's been a kind of ongoing, everybody's doing a tell-all, or everybody is writing about their childhood patterns or whatever. Why? Why do we like that?
People are fascinated with dirty laundry.
Certainly. Isn't it much more interesting than clean laundry? Even in fiction, right? If I say to you, I read this novel about a really happy family, you're like, cool. Right? If I say, oh my God, you're not going to believe the family in this book, you're like, tell me the title. Yeah, Marissa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's similar to what's going on here. It's an opportunity to reflect, to try to understand, and then share it.
Yes, awesome. I love that. So reflection, understanding, and sharing, right? And the idea being that you've done a little reflecting even before you start to write, right? So one, I think, prerequisite for writing an interesting memoir is leading a reflective and thoughtful and self-aware life. So to me, content doesn't matter as much as consciousness. That's really the heart of the matter when it comes to memoir. I could write about my lemon tree in my backyard if I do it with a reflective, conscious, self-aware kind of understanding of what role that plays in my life and in my patterns, then that can be interesting to a reader. I think one of the dangers of that kind of thinking is I have all this reflective, understood information that I'm then going to impart to you, right? So the other thing that I'm thinking about when I'm writing memoir and fiction, but certainly memoir, is I'm going to teach myself as I share it with you. So as I go through the process of writing it, I'm better be learning something that I didn't know at the beginning. If I'm just up there imparting knowledge to you, that's probably not going to be as interesting for you and definitely not as interesting for me. So that notion that something is still a mystery, an ongoing uncertainty, an ongoing discomfort, memoir, it seems to me, is one opportunity to, as my son puts it, sit in the squirmy chair, where you have to sit with the things that you would really, on some level, rather not sit with. And so on some level, you are, as a memoir, making a pact to dig deep, or why bother, with yourself and with your reader, it seems to me. Okay, what's hard about it? You're naked. If you're doing it well, you have to genuinely be vulnerable and exposed. What, Ashley? Vulnerable, absolutely. If you're putting your dirty laundry out there, somebody's going to look at it and point and laugh, right? And so you might worry about that. Yeah?
It's hard to get past a sense of self-indulgence.
Yes, love that you brought that up. Absolutely. Completely a narcissistic move, right? We have a fiction writer friend, Amy Hempel, who calls it memoirs. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I'm not going to explain that away. It is absolutely a narcissistic move, which is not quite the same thing as self-indulgent, I don't think, right? I mean, it is about you, but you're not just writing in a journal, which you could do. The notion is that it is valuable to other people to hear our stories, right? Yeah.
That was going to lead me to what I was going to say is the difficulty in knowing who your audience is.
Yeah.
So like what level of navel gazing does your audience want to participate in?
Right. Yeah. And there are so many things we could talk about in terms of audience, right? You're certainly not going to satisfy everybody, right? You're certainly going to find, no matter what you write, how well you think about avoiding that you're talking about, there are going to be people who go, ugh, I hate it. And then there are going to be people who say, not the way I remember it, you know? Yeah. Yes, that's so nice. And that's lovely because that's usually the second thing people get to in terms of difficulty. The first thing is I'm locked into what happened in the past. I can't, like in fiction, invent it or imagine it, right? But the past is not a solid thing, at least not in my past. I don't know about your memories. The other thing is what I just said to this woman. If you write about your relationship with your sister and you show it to your sister, yeah, this woman is shaking her head. Yeah, she's like, yeah, I know what my sister would say. If I show it to my sister, she's going to say, not the way I remember it. If you show it to your mom, she's going to say, where was I when that happened? So who are you thinking about as your audience is really important. For me, I tend not to think about the people who might be worried. I might be worried about this standing over my shoulder, reading it, right? Because that's paralyzing, okay? And we can talk actually about the difficulty in terms of the audience question and the truth question. What about what gives you the right to do it? In other words, if you're thinking about this might hurt people, or this might not be the truth that my sister has, or do I have the right to tell my story which inevitably overlaps with many other people's stories? Yeah, in the back.
Curated version of the truth, so you can choose how you tell it, and it's not exposition. So there's a lot of room to tell the story between the lines.
Yep, you can absolutely be decorous about what you expose, right? Absolutely, but sometimes maybe you can't do that, right? If the crux of it is, say, for example, the suffering that was done to you by somebody or something, or the suffering you caused to somebody else, right? Does that person have a right to say to you, I wish you wouldn't write about that, right? Yeah.
Solidifying a version of the narrative publicly.
Yeah.
And so you get like the first word and probably the word that's going to be the most memorable in a public way.
Yes, yes. And yeah, sorry, I missed the last part because I was talking over you. Yeah.
I say that it impacts the other people who are part of the narrative.
Right, and you probably have complicated feelings towards some of those people. You might feel like it would be good for them to have this aired. You might feel like they are irrelevant to having this aired, but you also don't want to do damage to them. I would suggest not writing if you are trying to do damage to somebody. I don't think that revenge is a good motivation for memoir writing, right? Okay, so how do you maneuver that? Let's build off on what the woman in the back said. How do you deal with those external and internal censors? Yeah.
Well, one thing, this won't apply if what you want, your story would cause suffering to someone else. That's a different topic. But you can encourage people to write their own memoir if they understand the way you do.
Yes, absolutely. Feel free to write a rebuttal.
Or write their own. History is rewritten over and over again with different perspectives. Yeah. And that creates a truth.
Yes. And if you don't do it, I love that you brought up history, because I do think that personal storytelling is always political, because it's always happening in a context, a historical context and a cultural context. And if you don't tell the story, somebody else will tell it for you. And so I think there is actually not just the right, but in some ways an obligation to tell the story, your story, in the context with the self-awareness that we were talking about before, that reflective self-awareness of where my story fits in the larger thing. It's also the reason then that it becomes valuable to other people, I think, right? Is that it's refracted through an individual's experience that then gets spoken back to a community. And then it's about connection. It's not about some kind of narcissistic gratification, right? Or self-indulgent gratification. Because it is really about connection, ultimately. And it is, like all writing, about expanding your grounds for empathy. So if you do have villains in your story, right, you better treat them with as much compassion as you're treating yourself, which is not the same thing as forgiving them or excusing them or any of that stuff, right? There's a great nonfiction writer named Abigail Thomas who says something like, if you can't forgive them, at least you can bring behavior to light, which I think is, I believe in that. I think it's useful to have the information, right? So there are many different thoughts on when you should censor yourself and when you shouldn't. I really believe that if you're not motivated by anger or revenge, you pretty much get to write about whatever you want to write about, knowing that people are not necessarily going to love it, right? The problem with trying to not cause suffering, which of course I am in general in favor of, is that I don't know what will cause suffering to everybody, right? I mean, I just don't. So I could think, oh my God, I couched that in the most careful way possible. I curated the details, right? And I could still have somebody say, that really pained me. I mean, in fact, I know a lot of memoir writers where they have friends and family who are pained because they weren't included in the memoir, okay? Okay, the other thing that's hard, I want to go back to the woman in the striped pants. Sorry, don't know your name. What's your name? Hannah. Talked about not knowing what the truth is. So the slipperiness of memory, or maybe even just the slipperiness of the past, if you're writing about something that you didn't have access to personally or something like that. You know, I think when we tell any story, but especially true stories, we tend to succumb to that temptation to make things better. I mean, so instead of 20 stitches, I got 40. Instead of, you know, I broke my leg falling down, it was a shark attack, you know, whatever. So one thing memoir writers do is pledge to rein in that exaggeration, right? And that's hard. And on some level, we're not going to be able to do that, and it makes us beholden to facts. On the other hand, as Hannah said, facts are slippery at best and malleable. I mean, I think we all know that from our political systems. So I think there's a lot of room for the play of memory and imagination, just as there is in fiction. Sometimes people think in memoir that that's not happening, but it absolutely is. So I think that's also freeing and liberating to remember that. The main impetus beside of the kind of shading that we normally do, I think, when we're trying to write our own stories, is that we don't want to look bad. I mean, that's just human nature. I'm putting out this thing that's going to be a record, as you said, right? And I would like to look like a pretty good person, right? So if I said to you right now, write down the thing you are most ashamed about, my guess is I'd get the thing that you are second or third most ashamed about. And that's just natural, right? I mean, especially if I said, and then we're going to put them on the board with your names next to them. Okay, so one thing I would really want you to think about is the way in which writing one story is an opportunity, a chance to embrace that uncertainty and discomfort that comes from trying to examine yourself and your patterns and your role in your patterns as vigorously as you are examining what the world did to you or what the people in the world did to you. So your personal responsibility for the situation in which you find yourself. I think the best memoirs do that. They say, here's what the world threw at me. I had a terrible mother, or I got cancer, or whatever it is, and here's how I responded to that, and I need to take responsibility for those responses. It is a chance to feel like you are understanding and revealing and sharing things about yourself that you would really rather not face. And I think that last part is really important for great memoir, which is it's not just I'm going to reveal what a great mom I was, right? Or I'm going to reveal how successful I was at Williams when I wasn't well prepared, or whatever it is. You really need to think and sit with the things that you really would prefer not to have revealed, I think. And that's where that connection and communication comes in. Yeah?
Yeah, I was about to agree with you. I think the most interesting memoirs are the ones where people are the most vulnerable, but also the most self-deprecating.
Yes.
And as a writer, like, that's the problem that I have, especially as a woman, and especially as a woman of color. Like, you don't want to kind of air your dirty laundry because you feel like you have to be like this model minority, but for me, what helped was kind of like this, I write now thinking and believing that no one is going to read it.
Yeah, no, you're laughing, but I think that's a really, really useful technique, is like, don't worry. I mean, you kind of worry about the kind of reader you want, right? I always say to my classes, you know, write for the people who get the joke, right? You're writing for somebody you don't have to explain everything to, but you're not thinking, oh, what is the African-American publishing world going to think about this? Or what are my African-American friends going to think about this, right?
Or what am I, just fellow alums, going to think of this? Right?
Yes.
Regardless of color, because
Right.
I just want to be like, I don't want them to know that I was drinking at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right?
Oh, yeah, I hear you. Yeah. I had drinking policy changed at Williams, but that's another story. I'm sure they won't want that recorded. Okay, so I totally agree with that. And I think that the interesting thing about that is that when you do what you're talking about, then you are not giving a reader what they already know or what they think they know, right? No surprise for you, no surprise for your reader, right? And so when I pick up a memoir and I say, okay, this is from a Black author who went to Williams, right? I have a bunch of what I bring to the table about that, right? For better and worse. We all do as readers. If that can upend my narrative in some way, that's a useful book for me to have read, right? And for it to upend my narrative, it has to upend your narrative. So you can't play into the received narrative that has been told and told and told, right? Because all those received narratives are pretty reductive, as we know. And boring. Love that. Yeah, for sure. So I really, if I'm stressing one thing in any of my writing classes, it is treat yourself with the rigor that you treat all of your other characters, right? Even in fiction, because all of us are in some part of our fictional characters. One of the things that seems important about that, I was thinking about this because I was reading this thing, a quote from this therapist named Elvin Semrad, and he said, "The greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves." So one of the things you're doing in memoir writing is an opportunity to stop telling the stories that you've told over and over again that are the scripts that you rely on. I'm not suggesting you don't dig into those scripts, but in other words, you go, what am I leaving out of that party version of that story that I tell? Or when I used to tell stories about my mother who often behaved abominably, I would always laugh at the end of it. So that would tell my audience, this wasn't a big deal. You know, I can handle this, right? And could I tell a story about her that didn't do that, that had a totally different tone, right? Or could I tell one that was playful about something that I didn't feel completely playful about? That kind of thing. So what are you leaving out when you tell those cocktail party versions of your stories, right? And what are the stories that you go back to and back to and back to? And why are those the stories and not the other one that's kind of lurking over here, right? You know, don't lie to yourself if you're going to try to write your own story, because then what's the point, right? Be honest, dig deep, don't bother. Okay, we've started to talk about this a little bit. Why do it, given that it's so hard? Because, you know, there's like a billion people in China who don't care if we write another book. We started to talk about connection. We started to talk about what's possible when you try to do this hard stuff. Yeah? Personal growth.
Personal growth and growth of community, because like the keynote speaker in the first night, when she had that embarrassing moment, it drew everybody in and made them feel part of that community, because she was doing, as you said, airing her dirty laundry in some form. Well, actually. So I think that makes you feel more part of, connected to that person, because you know some of the understanding.
You are flawed in the same ways that I am flawed, because we are human beings on this planet and nobody is not flawed, right? And to have somebody stand up and have written this record that says, here are the ways in which my flaws impacted me. Here are the ways in which they impacted others. Here is my way of trying to understand that and grow from it and not continue to repeat unhealthy patterns or patterns that are not getting me where I want to be, or how to get patterns get me out of the situation I'm in, right? You are learning skills as you are sharing the news with others. I really think that's true. And it is a place to practice that, right? And again, no one's going to die if you don't do it well. It's not like being a neurosurgeon, okay? So you can fail multiple times at this, and that's okay. And each time you practice it, you're laying down new patterns for yourself. I totally, love that. Yeah.
I was thinking right before you said neurosurgeon, I'm not one, but I am a diabetes doctor. And I was thinking that one of the things I do in my practice with my patients, because it's a daily struggle for them, is we stop the visit, I'm not typing, and I say to them, I really just want you to think about your patterns, and I want you to think back about where this is coming from, right? I can prescribe all the medicine I want, but like, why are you doing these things?
Yeah.
And it's almost like a little mini memoir at the visit.
Yeah. Think about your story. Think about what role you've been playing in your story, and can you take another role? I mean, one of the things I try to do in especially first-year classes at Williams is, we all arrive here, I think, or at least I did, sort of thinking that values were like genetic, like they weren't like clothes that I put on every morning. And I think we haven't just thought about where we get our values when we're 17, 18, maybe, or I didn't when I was a 17, 18-year-old. And so that notion that, oh, is that how you want to go out in the world? Or do you want to wear a different thing than that, right? It is about reinvention, which is another way of saying growth, I think, which is, who else can you be? What else can you be in this world? Not like completely different necessarily, but what is the best version of yourself, right? And how can writing help you figure out how to move towards that? I think most writers don't believe you ever get there. We are the kind of people who think, never am I going to go, done that. I was a really good writer now. Checked that off my list, okay? The line is always moving, obviously. Yeah, and other reasons, yeah.
You mentioned empathy before, but I'm thinking also there's compassion, appreciation, understanding for difference.
Yes.
So we've talked about a lot of things that the writer gets for the why, but I think there are also things that the reader gets.
Yeah, like what?
When people share their stories.
Yeah.
And you can read across differences.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's something comforting about some company in the trenches, right? Yeah, I think that's really true. Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on talking about all this, and I'm happy to, talk after a little. I want to leave a little time to do this exercise. So, I mean, I would just wrap up this part of things by saying, don't write your own story because you're imparting the news you already know. Write your own story because you want to know what you don't know about what you know. Everybody's like, okay. Like, well said, Karen. I thought you were a wordsmith. So, I mean, there's a way in which we can sabotage ourselves by saying, I need to have more information before I start. I need to know where my grandmother was born or what town they grew up in or all the facts before I can start writing what I think about the facts, right? And I would say you kind of teach yourself what gaps you need to fill in as you go. Some of you may have read Annie Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, about writing, and she has a really wonderful, I think it's in that one, I don't think it's in the other book. Those of you who've read it can remember with me. She talks about writing a 1-inch picture frame, so just look at something through a 1-inch picture frame and write that. And that can be your start, right? Or write a memory, or write, she also has a great exercise, write everything you remember about kindergarten lunch. Just write it down, right? The writer who I mentioned, Abigail Thomas, has a really, really helpful, tiny little book called Thinking About Memoir, and in it she has 1 million write 2 pages on. They're really, I hate those kind of prompts. I'm about to give you some, but I hate them. But I really love Abby Thomas's stuff. It's like, one of my favorites is, write 2 pages that either starts or ends with, that's enough of that. Okay, and then I would say also, don't despair. I mean, remember, it takes time and the learning is never done, and that should feel like playing in a sandbox as much as it feels like a burden, right? You know, we've all been using words for a long time, but it's hard to craft them into something that can connect with other people. So don't give yourself, you know, too many stabs in the heart because you didn't do it well. Okay, I'm going to pass out, and those of you who are in my class might even recognize this. I can't remember. Mary's going to tell us if this was. So these are just random questions. Take one and just pass it down. It's a questionnaire that I might give out to a memoir writing class. Here's some things to think about. What I'd like you to do is just read through it pretty quickly, low stakes, okay? Jot down things that some of the questions make you think about, okay? And then I'm going to ask you to do another thing in a minute based on that. And if I don't have enough, just please share with people. Does anyone need more pen or notebooks? Oops. Of course, I'm just breaking all your stuff, Julie.
Thanks very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Anyone else? Yeah, can we share up some papers? Sorry, I didn't know how many there would be. I can also just read them out loud. No, just read through it quickly. Whatever snags you, whatever hooks you, just think about how you would answer it. Just for a minute. You can jot down notes if you want to, but you don't have to. And then I'm going to ask you to just do something else in about a minute, as soon as everybody's had a chance to look at the list. So you're basically just seeing if any of those questions make you think of something interesting to you. And when you're done, if you're willing to have Julia, take your sentence and write it on the board. Please put your hand up and one of us will come grab that. Awesome. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Somebody else?
The first step toward writing a memoir is being brave enough to be naked.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to read this.
Well, you can come down and write it if you want. Thank you. The second one.
Yep.
The starred one. Here's the second starred one. And then, sorry. Yes, Mary, thank you. Which, the one you circled. Kitty just drew. Okay, we need a couple more. Awesome, perfect. How many do we have? I can give this one back. Who gave me the first one? Yes, thank you. Awesome. All right, I think this will be good. Here's the last one. Maybe that. Okay. So this is an exercise or a version of one that I do in a lot of my classes. It's an exercise basically in close reading, but it's also an exercise in, as you were saying, just you took that step, you put your sentence up there, and the sky did not fall in, at least not yet. We did not all stand up and point and laugh, at least not yet, right? Always a possibility. So you have to step in, to do this exercise, right? In class, we would have had everybody do it. So you wouldn't have had to be quite as brave. You would just have had to follow rules, which Williams students are quite good at. So in a fiction class, I would ask for a fiction sentence, a fictive sentence. In a lit class, I would have pulled published sentences from some of the work that we're going to be reading that semester, and we would have put that on. What I'm thinking about here is when you are facing that blank page, anything is possible. You can put anything down. The second you put even a very short sentence, Kitty just drew blood, you have made some decisions that have had some of those possibilities, endless possibilities, fall away, and some have risen to the surface. I call it policing your sentences, which is probably not the right term, but the idea is you're interrogating what you've done because your instincts are smarter than you are. So what you want to be able to do is pay attention to what you see yourself doing. It's a way of recognizing your patterns, right? To go back to the first comment. Okay, I'm going to read these out loud. Kitty just drew blood. I don't like my name, I never have. When I was little, I thought everyone, what does it say? Had?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Everyone had the same name as both grandmothers. I lived with my boyfriend behind the East Jerusalem bus station. He told me the painting was not a real place, but was a place in his mind. Do we have one more?
Yeah, we have one more of this one.
Okay. We need to write it, though. Okay, I'll read it, and then you can write it.
Great.
Uh-oh.
Yes. Would you like to read it out loud?
Yeah, will you read it out loud? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. I can even say it.
Okay. Oh, she has it memorized. Ew. Okay, go.
When Officer Kelly arrived some 3 hours later, I decided it was finally time to climb down out of the tree.
Okay, when Officer Kelly arrived about 3 hours later, I decided it might finally be time to climb down from the tree. I decided it might be finally time to climb down from the tree. Can you pass that back to her?
Who had the grandmothers? I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's start with this one. I lived with my boyfriend behind the East Jerusalem bus station. What do you notice about it? What's specific? Specific place. You have located your reader in a specific place. Not just in a specific place, but the bus station in that place. Not just the bus station in that place, but behind the bus station in that place, right? So you've had 3 pretty, not just Jerusalem, but East Jerusalem. The bus station, not just a station, but the bus station, right? Not just there, but behind, right? Great. What else do you notice? Past tense, great. I lived with my boyfriend. What associations do you have with the past tense? Usually memoirs are in the past tense because of that split between the reflective self and the current self, right? But not always, not always.
That this is no longer the case.
That I maybe no longer live with the boyfriend, right? Can we say that for sure? No, right? But at this point, when you're reading sentences, you're going, anything that I can possibly speculate about goes in the little basket that I'm pulling behind me as I read through a piece of work. Everything gets thrown in that wagon. When I get to the end of the work, then I'm going to sift through all that stuff in the wagon and go, which of these things made a kind of pattern that makes sense through this work, right? Okay, what else do you notice?
There are 2 characters.
2 characters. There's an I and a boyfriend. Yeah, we don't know if they're from here, right, or if they're visitors. We don't know the gender of the I, right? And this is where you can interrogate what you're bringing to the table. If you assumed the I was a woman, you need to take responsibility for that assumption. Okay? I mean, because I forget who said it, but the reader is learning something about themselves as, I mean, that's incorrect grammar, but you know what I mean. The reader is learning something as they read, right? So if I'm going, oh, what associations do I have with East Jerusalem? That's going to be different than the associations you have with East Jerusalem, right? Living with a boyfriend, I'm going to have different associations with that than you might have with that, right? So I'm not saying you're trying to flatten your associations. I'm saying you're trying to heighten your awareness of what you bring to the table and how that affects the way you read and therefore the way you write. Because if there's one thing you should absolutely be doing if you want to write your own story, it's reading widely and varied. I don't care what you read. It can be junk. It can be tell-alls. It can be whatever. Just read. You need to see how other people have solved these problems, right? What else do you notice? Is there anything tonally, is there anything attitudinally that is helping you here? How this person, the speaker, feels about this situation?
I was thinking is the person ashamed or proud?
Nice. So you're already asking, what is this person's stance towards what he or she is describing, right? In other words, that is what you're looking for, and that goes back to my opening comments about this is about consciousness. This is not about content. So it's interesting that it's East Jerusalem, right? But I don't care. What I care about really is how this I relates to this and this, right? I want to know what the I's relationship to that is. Yeah?
I was thinking about other ways it could have been structured, like my boyfriend and I lived behind, but that has a totally different meaning, right? It's like, it's not the same thing, even though it sounds so
How would
similar.
you describe the difference?
It sounds like this person lived with the boyfriend as if it was almost like the boyfriend pulled that person there. As
Changes
opposed
the
to
relationship.
An equal thing that they did together.
Nice. I really love, it's a really great technique to go, how else could this have been written, right? That's really, really useful as a reader. And then also, it's not just as a reader of other people's published work. When you go back through what you've put on the page. I mean, many, many writers have said, how do I know what I think until I see what I saw, right? In other words, I got to put it down first, and then I can figure out what I'm seeing and what I did. Anything else about this one? Yeah, Mary.
Just to go off of that point, because it's structured in this way, it makes me feel like the story will be about the I and less about the boyfriend.
So the I is central, first position, first word, right? Which is often the case in a memoir, right? And then I lived with my boyfriend. You're already feeling the kind of, and if you're believing that it's no longer the case, let's not talk too much about him, right? Although he is in the first phrase, right? So maybe there is a desire to go, you don't have to think about the boyfriend that much. And I'm like, well, then why is he in the first line? Interesting.
He doesn't have a name. If I live with my boyfriend, Fred.
Right.
Fred has an identity.
Right.
It's just generic.
No, his importance is what his relationship is to me, right? And he's my boyfriend, right? So it's not just I. It's also, oh, do you remember there's an I, right? It's I lived with my boyfriend, right? Great. Love it. Okay. Which one do you want to talk about next? We have maybe 2 minutes. What? The painting?
Kitty just drew blood.
Okay, Kitty just drew blood. What do you notice?
Who's Kitty?
Who's Kitty? Is it a cat or a person? Yeah.
Who's blood?
Yeah. You have a lot of questions, which can sometimes be good. If you have too many, you might find it frustrating. Yeah?
It's not present tense, but it feels like it almost is, but it's
Yes. Well, the drawing blood is past tense, but the now of the narrative might be present, right? So that, we didn't talk about the now of memoirs. The memoir, because of that split self, the narrative self and the reflective self, has to have a now. Like, from what point is this being narrated? You don't have to get it explicitly on the page, it seems to me, but you have to be really clear about it, right? So in this case, what Hannah is saying is, this just happened. So I'm past the blood drawing, but only a second or a minute, right? Nice. What else do you notice?
Drew, is it a kid drawing blood, or is it somebody?
What did you think?
I at first thought it was like Drew blood in the
Scratched somebody.
And then I thought, but maybe it's about someone who's drawing blood.
Yeah, which are you more interested in?
person drawing blood.
The first way. How come?
Second way.
Oh,
Second way.
so the person drawing blood. Oh, that's so interesting. I'm interested in the other way.
But you're not me.
I know. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So the reason I'm more interested in the other way is it's violent and it's exciting and dramatic. And I'm like, oh, maybe Kitty is a person and they're having a really violent fight. Yeah.
Vaguely dark and menacing, though, if someone named Kitty is drawing blood.
What? Yeah, it could be anything, right? But this is what I'm saying. What we want as a reader is really useful to pay attention to, right? If I say, again, it goes back to what I was saying to you. If I say, this is going to be about a really, really functional relationship where, the Kitty just drew blood because Kitty is the mom and the girl has cancer and she has to take blood samples and you're like, well, that's dramatic, right? If I say, Kitty just drew blood from the people she has in the basement, you're going, oh.
Kitty has a job in the doctor's office that's very boring and all she gets to do is draw blood.
Yeah, no, exactly. I missed a hand. Yeah, no. What's your name? Isha.
I think it's meant to be sort of dramatic because it leaves
So much of it.
For example, like if she is a doctor and this is what she does all the time, I think it's meant to be a bait and switch.
Yeah.
It's like Kitty just drew blood, period, and you think
Right.
that's something sinister, and then
Right.
the next sentence elucidates it.
Right. That's really nice. So you feel that the narrator and the author has their eyes on you. In other words, they are working to operate on you in that sentence, right? Yeah.
Maybe it's because I love cats. I was just imagining a kitten who would be playfully and playing.
Yeah.
And just drew blood. Well, whoops.
And again, my reaction tells you more about me than it tells you about the sentence. Yeah, for sure, as does yours. Yeah.
I was just going to say to that point, because Kitty's at the beginning of the sentence, you also can't quite tell if it's a proper noun or a name.
Right. Yeah, that's what you were saying to start with, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Like it could be a cat, but it could be a person.
Yeah.
A cat named Kitty.
Yeah. Okay, are you frustrated yet with all these open questions? No.
I'm still totally manipulated. I really want to read this book.
Because you have so many questions, and you feel too beholden to the next sentence.
I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because you're unmoored.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, again, tells you more that's interesting, about yourself, right? And you have lots of ways to place that in your own patterns, right? Yeah, I love that. Last comment, yeah.
And that's that it's just 4 words, all short words.
Yeah. What's the effect of that on you?
I think it makes it more urgent for you.
Nice. It's short, it's staccato, the cadence, compare the cadence to the first sentence that we did. Right, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're out of time. I really want you to go to Lynn's talk. She's going to solve all of your anxiety problems. And as we know, writers have nothing but anxiety. Thank you all for coming. And a special thank you to those of you who shared your sentences. Thank you.